Hi, this is David Allen Greer. I'm the president of the IEEE Computer Society, and this video is a summary of a talk that I gave at the Information Processing Society of Japan conference in Sendai, Japan, in March of 2013. This talk was entitled Crowdsourcing, Social Computing, and New Methods of Computer Science. I started the talk with this picture, which is a picture of the Math Tables Project, a group that worked in New York City in the 1930s to do large-scale computing before we had machines to do it for us. I then moved to this picture, which is an important site in the history of computing. It's the building in which John von Neumann built his computer, which is this machine. That building is now a daycare center for the Institute for Advanced Study. This machine, John von Neumann's machine, is now in the Smithsonian. It is, of course, not the first computer, nor even the first important computer, but it is the project that solidified the idea of the von Neumann architecture, the design for computers that are now common in almost everything that we do. In developing his ideas, von Neumann stressed the fact that his machines were going to be deterministic. They would follow a set of instructions and do the same thing on the same data all the time. They would be able to repeat exactly what they had done before. They were replacing groups of people who were called human computers, who von Neumann saw as unreliable and non-deterministic. Yet these groups, and again we have a picture of the Math Tables Project from New York City, were very flexible forms of computation. You could organize them in ways that combined the different skills of all the different members and get them to work in a way that produced a very high capacity of computing ability. The secret for these organizations, and in particular the Math Tables Project, the one that was the centerpiece of my writing, was the fact that they used markets as a management tool. You can see the market they used outlined in this red box. It was a series of racks in which they put the work. Individual workers would come and select work from those racks, decide what they wanted to do their work, and return it when it was done. These little markets, which were used to manage groups like this, allowed them to combine the intelligence of their different workers in a flexible way. It was a way of managing operations that we largely abandoned during the 1950s, when we set up more stable organizations with staff and line organization and people who commanded and managed each step of the group. The way that I connect the von Neumann machine and this computing group is to note that we are now building computing systems that include social structures. These things are, by their very nature, dynamic entities. And being social structures, they use certain elements to define the roles of everybody who works within these structures. These elements include position, which is to say the way that each individual worker relates to the other workers. In addition to position, these organizations have to provide function. That is to say, each worker in the social structure has to have a function, has to do something. Finally, the social structure has to provide each worker a sense of status, of how they relate to the others and what authority they can command. These three things are independent. Position is determined by relationships, by who you report to and the ideas of review and payment and things like that. Function is what you do. It's defined by skills and job descriptions, the kind of information that comes to you and the kind of work that you perform on it. Finally, status is determined by the quality of your work and your ability to work within the social structure. And it can give you power and authority that allows you to do your function more easily or more with greater difficulty, or allows you to use your position beyond what the description says you should be able to use it to do. These three things are central to any social structure. Now, if we get to the basic thesis of this talk, the idea is that we are looking at that von Neumann model, at that deterministic computer, and we are expanding it with a social network. Just to do a quick review of the von Neumann model, this is a sketch of it. A von Neumann computer has three elements. It has the storage or memory, the processor that works on the data, and a control unit that takes the program and decodes it and controls the processor and memory. And then in this model, the program's shown from coming outside. It can obviously be part of memory as well, just as data can be kept in storage and need not flow through it, as again this diagram shows. What we are doing almost by default, and what we've actually done for a long time, is putting this architecture as part of a social structure, part of an organization that has its members defined in terms of rank, position, and status. This kind of activity combines the deterministic model of the von Neumann computer with the non-deterministic data processing structure of the social organization. Now, in doing this, I need to be clear that it is something quite different from human-computer interaction. We understand human-computer interaction quite well and spend a lot of time studying it. That deals, however, with a deterministic model working with a single human being. What we're talking about is the combination of a data processing structure, social structure, with a deterministic computer. Now, to understand why this is a challenge, remember that when we combine people in this, they are doing work, they're processing data, just as those workers in the Math Tables project were processing data. When we ask people to process data, we're asking for a human judgment. We're looking for something that's not necessarily right or wrong. Indeed, human judgment can never be judged strictly right or wrong, although you can discipline human beings to do things like logic or calculation that does have right or wrong answers. In general, human activity, human processing of data, produces solutions that are better or worse, that can be judged. And we represent judgment or valuation as taking place in a market. You're always comparing one thing against an alternative. That's how you assign value. That's how you make a judgment value. Now, one of the things about human organizations is that they're not necessarily reproducible, that they can work on data in one way and then come back on it and do the same things to the same data and come back with different results. Next, we note that human judgment can also work with a broader range of input than a single human being, that you can deal with non-symbolic input, things like music lines or graphical imagery. Next, we note yet again that human judgments are not provably true or false, that most of the things humans do to data is something that you can weigh one against another and conclude that one approach might be better than a different approach. But their understanding, what they contribute to looking at a piece of data, is not necessarily producing a result that you can prove to be a deterministically correct result. Again, when you repeat this process, not being true or false, you evaluate it, you provide value to it. Someone, for example, would look at a picture and try to describe it. Is their description better than someone else's? That kind of evaluation, as I said, is always done in a market setting because it's always comparative. It's because of that market that we're using the scales to represent it. But it's combining that market with a deterministic process. That is what we are doing when we're taking human judgment and adding it to a computational system. Now, before you rush in with your objections, I'd like to point this out. When we are using people to process data, that is to say, they're writing descriptions for pictures, they're listening to music and trying to draw ideas out of them, they're doing translation or editing or any of the human tasks that people do better than others. We're not evaluating this work necessarily in a cash market. It can be done in other kinds of markets as well, but it's always done in a market. People will submit stuff to a market because they're glad to use skills that they have, or they're interested in being something bigger than themselves, or they feel they're contributing for the good of society. They can get all of these things when they do work. But nonetheless, when you present human work to a market, you get something back. And what you get back can alter the three basic elements of the social structure. What a human being gets back from submitting something to a market can alter their position within the social structure, or their function. They can get more skills, for example, or money that allows them to shift to a different position. Or, of course, status. They can be viewed as a more valuable employee. Now, at this point, I've been talking in a very abstract way, and perhaps it's useful for me to give a quick example to help you understand what we're doing when we combine computing with human organizations. Suppose you want to put together a system that takes a group of photographs and processes them, and the result of the process is a written description of all the photographs. Each individual photograph gets a written description. Well, you can run it through certain image recognition and image processing programs to get it started. You can look for faces. You can run it through programs that identify each image as being interior or exterior, landscape or portrait. But once you've done these, you then have some questions that people can answer better. So you combine those programs, which run on a deterministic John von Neumann machine, with a group of people that might say, all right, you have 3 faces on here. I'll write descriptions of the faces. Or I'll describe whether it's outside or inside and the nature of that scene. Those texts, those descriptions or pieces of descriptions can go back into the computer, and you can have a computer program that organizes them, that pulls them together, and eventually from those pieces completes a full and complete description. Now, to see how we take those people and combine it with the computer, let's go back to that judgment market. We take the judgment market and say, okay, we have 2 sides to it. Someone who is offering a judgment. You give them a photograph and they provide you with a written 1 sentence that says whether it's interior or exterior or whether they're faces or not. On the other side of the judgment market, you have an individual who accepts the judgment, who says, yes, I find that judgment valuable, or no, I will reject it. Now, what makes this interesting is in this judgment market, you usually aren't taking the judgment of one person versus another. You're drawing people from a population, from an organization. This is in particular what happens in crowdsourcing, that you'll put a question to the judgment market and someone will come from the crowd to answer it. And someone on the other side will come from a different crowd to accept or reject it. Now you ask, what's sort of the nature of this crowd? What's the social structure? And we find that there are really 3 kinds of levels. There's one in which the social structure you're drawing from is a permanent employee, a single individual. And when you do that, you're back into human-computer interaction. Or it can be a constrained market, a group of people especially chosen for it. In the talk, I used the example of how the United States State Department is doing crowdsourcing among its employees. It's generally doing so because it needs to have a group of people it can trust with secure documents. But it's still a smaller group of people. Finally, there's a general crowd where you're just reaching out to whoever is out there in the marketplace, whoever's connected to the internet. These 3 levels are what you can use a marketplace to engage. In the crowdsourcing model, you generally have, on the judgment offered side, a crowd, a large general group of people, undistinguished, who individuals provide answers when questions are put through the marketplace. On the other side, the judgment accepted side, you have one person, the crowdsourcer, if you will, who is accepting judgments, posing questions and accepting judgments. Now, to see how this market describes a certain class of human activities, we need to note that when you set up a market, you can run it with different kinds of rules. The first kind of rule is how you compensate workers who come to the market. You can open the market to a lot of people, let everyone bring their work, and then you choose one person and reward them. It's like a contest. You accept many submissions and you reward one. On the other hand, you can put a question, and everyone who brings a valid answer you can reward. That's the reward all model, and it's more like a general hiring market. The next rule you can put on it is an interaction. How do the workers engage that marketplace? Well, you can make it very tightly controlled by the market. You can say people have to work independently and they can't collaborate. That's a market-controlled interaction. On the other one, you can just say, work with whoever you will. That's a more open model, and that allows the workers to control their own life and decide how they will organize their work. These two sets of rules produces 4 different kinds of activities that you can use as part of a human-computer system. These 4 things are described in this chart. In the upper left-hand corner, you have a thing called a crowd contest. This is where you put a question to people and you choose the one best answer to it and reward the person who does it. This is very commonly done in crowdsourcing and in other forms of human social interaction. You can say, for example, I need a new logo, I need a new t-shirt. And the best one that comes in, you reward. Below it, you have a similar sort of management organized activity. This is lower left, where you divide work into very, very teeny jobs and put them out on the web and pay everyone who does a job. This is called microtasking. It's most commonly associated with Amazon Mechanical Turk. On the right-hand side, you have self-organized, where the crowd and the workers can figure out how they interact. At the bottom, where you pay all the workers, you have a thing called macrotasking. This is a lot like freelancing and is done very commonly over the internet. Finally, at the top, in the upper right-hand corner, you have what's called an innovation crowd. It's a self-organized pay one, a lot like a contest. But you're basically saying, go off, solve this problem, and the team with the best solution will get rewarded. Now let's look at examples of each of the 4. The first one are the contests, and I think I've described that fairly well. These are now very common on the web. They have a long history, and basically they are things where organizations or people put out a question and say, design a logo, design a t-shirt, design a slide deck, do a piece of work for me, and I'll reward the best example. These sorts of things are marked by markets where many, many people submit possible solutions. Exactly 1 worker is compensated, and these have a long, long history. Fine arts schools have long held contests to develop the skills of their students and to give them a first effort to start their career. You can also see them in the architectural contests that companies use to design new buildings. When you look at how this fits into computing systems, it in effect draws from the ideas of public opinion, the ideas of how you're trying to discern what a broad population thinks and what it wants to know. It's also related to feedback systems. You're putting something out and you're getting responses from human beings, and you may have to adjust your plans or strategies to respond to those human beings. The next kind of organization that you can engage with this crowdsourcing social computing idea is microtasks. This isn't quite the same order I did in the original slide, but I think it helps to explain it in this order. Macrotasking is a form of freelancing, and it's now very common on the web. If you need some help designing a web page, some help with accounting services, some help with marketing, many, many things, you can get fractional employment, a freelancer to take some of the work through a market like Odesk or Elance. Using this market, you can hire exactly the skills you need. You don't have to rely on your accountant to do some additional financing or your web designer, who's a very good programmer, to try their hand at graphic design. In general, you are supposed to let the workers work directly for you, but you can allow some coordination. These categories aren't perfectly fit. As the employer, you usually guide them, but still the workers can work together and try to get something done that's slightly bigger. One of the key aspects about this is that the worker can generally see an entire job, that they aren't restricted to just a limited, narrow task and don't know how that task fits into a bigger whole. They see the whole, they see a start, a middle, and an end, and they know how their work fits into it. The next form of crowdsourcing that fits into this model is the microtask. Now, macro and micro sounds like a comparison of big versus little, and at some level, this is true. Microtasks are usually associated with Amazon, Mechanical Turk, and another dozen or so sites that specialize in offering such tasks to the crowd. In these tasks, the workers work independently, usually with guidance only from the market and not from each other. The employer takes the results from the market and assembles them into the whole. The workers can even be assembled into a very complicated workflow so that the work is divided into various kinds of small jobs, and the results of those small jobs are combined at different points and perhaps generating new tasks that are sent back to the crowd before finally being assembled into a whole. The last of the four forms of crowdsourcing is this innovation crowdsourcing, or self-organized crowds, as it is sometimes called. These are things that are like contests, but you put them forth and allow groups of people to organize themselves to try to solve it. In these, you begin by posting a problem to your marketplace. These problems are such that they generally require the coordination of many people with different kinds of talents. You let teams self-organize. People rally the kinds of groups they want together to try to solve the work. Again, it's a new form of an old concept. The title has often been Boss's Head Under the Workman's Cap, that you let workmen act as bosses to organize the work and to get it done as best they know how. One of the kinds of examples I used to use is the Red Balloon Challenge. This was a contest where people put 10 red balloons around the United States and asked teams to organize themselves over the internet to find them. I took part in one where we were doing something similar. We were looking for fugitives in 5 cities. These were people who were pretending to be running from the law: New York, Washington, Bratislava, London, and Stockholm. In this challenge, as in the Red Balloon, what happened was that people put a request on the web saying, we're trying to organize a team to do this. People volunteered, and the crowd got to organize how it worked to go find the red balloons or the missing people. So now that I've taken you through this, I seem to have put together a very complicated model that combines computers, discrete, deterministic automata, with people, organizations and structures of people who do work. Why do we want to do that? Why do you want to add judgment to the deterministic side of computation? The answer is obviously that you can do more, that you're expanding one model of computing which can do a great deal, but is still limited in time and space into what it can accomplish, and expanding it into a more complicated but more powerful process. This is the expanded model that I see. It has the 3 elements of the von Neumann machine: memory, a processor, a control unit. But added to this is a market, a judgment market, a market where the computer can take questions and put them out to groups of people, and in response get results that it can incorporate into its work. The object of this effort is not quite this. This is, of course, John von Neumann's computer with Piyush Javaria, who is a student from India and one of the leaders of their computing society. It's not this kind of computation, but something more like this. This, again, was the Math Tables project that brought people together, built an organization to do work, and to do so flexibly, powerfully, accurately, to take the best that people could do and combine the results of their work into a project that was bigger than any one of them could have done by themselves. If you want an example of a very real, complicated problem that we are facing, look at Smart Grid. Smart Grid is an information processing system. It takes as input information that it has collected and devised, and in return gives electricity. Now, some of this is deterministic. You have a computer gathering data from each individual household and collecting it and asking how much electricity do we need on average at this day, at this time of year. But part of it also combines human judgment, because part of the smarts of Smart Grid is to incorporate market mechanisms that allow people to choose, to use electricity when it might be cheaper and easier to generate. And so we now have a system that does digital, discrete, deterministic calculation, the data collection you need to run it. And you also have people making judgments based on information. The question being put to them is very market-oriented. How much electricity are you willing to buy at this price? Are you willing to pay for your lights, to pay for your air conditioning, to charge your electric car? Those kinds of questions bring different kinds of answers from people. And it shows the combination of human input and human work with the deterministic computations of a computer. So here was my talk. It was a talk that dealt with what is happening to computing, and particularly what is happening as we're using the von Neumann model and merging it with human organizations that process data. In particular, when the connection between those organizations that process data, and it's an organization that might write descriptions, it might do translations, it might produce graphic images, any of those things. What happens when you combine that kind of thing with a computer linked by a market? This is David Alan Greer. You can reach me at the email address given on this slide. I hope to hear from some of you. In the meantime, take care. I'd like to thank the people at Voice Bunny who did a Japanese translation of this talk. Take care.